On our clinic website, we have a list of test profiles that we offer at the East Coast Naturopathic Clinic, and one of them is called the Test Everything from Head to Toe profile. And we get a fair number of calls and emails about this profile, just with some kind of common questions. And so my staff asked me to put together a video to explain some of these, explain the test profile in a little more detail, so it would hopefully answer some questions, and they already work so hard, so hopefully it'll help to take some of the load off of them, not needing to answer as many questions about this. So the whole idea with the Test Everything from Head to Toe profile is basically just outlining that if somebody has the desire to have everything tested from head to toe, then this is the profile that they could consider. There's generally two sort of categories of patients, generally speaking, that ask about the Test Everything from Head to Toe profile. It's either folks who have some significant health issues and just no one's been able to figure them out. They've been working with their family doctors, maybe specialists, maybe seen other healthcare providers of different walks of life, and just they still haven't been able to figure out their chronic fatigue, their chronic pain, their chronic neurological disorders, whatever it happens to be. And so they just kind of want to get everything tested to see, what might be going on. That if they test for enough stuff, then they'll finally figure out like what the heck is going on. And then the other category of patients that generally asks about this test are folks who want to do some biohacking. They're generally feeling healthy, and they just want to know what's going on with some of the metrics with their system. So they want to know about their cardiovascular markers and gut health markers and different things like that. And of course, there's other folks that might be curious about this profile that don't fit either of those categories, but generally those are the kind of categories of folks that are interested in this type of test. One of the sort of misunderstandings or just whatever the right word is for it, assumptions with this is that the Test Everything from Head to Toe profile is just a single test, that it's just one blood test or one saliva test or something like that that's going to test every single marker related to someone's health. And while I dream and fantasize about a test like that, it does not exist. There is no one test that's going to test absolutely everything from head to toe. We're not quite in the Star Trek phase of things where they have the ability to do the little scan and it just tells you exactly what's going on. I wish that was available. Hopefully it will be at some point in time, but unfortunately it's just not a reality at this point in time. So the Test Everything from Head to Toe profile is basically a combination of tests. It's a grouping of tests. It's basically multiple blood tests, stool tests, urine tests, saliva tests that are all together test everything from head to toe. So it's not just one test. So what I'll do is just quickly go through the different profiles that are included within the Test Everything from Head to Toe profile and just kind of maybe touch on those all briefly and just explain how those tests are done. So the first profile is called the cardiometabolic profile. We generally do that through a lab called Doctors Data, which is based out of the US. As I'll just quickly say here, we don't have any financial affiliation with any of these labs. With the vast majority of labs that do these tests, the arrangement that's available is that patients can pay the lab directly for having these tests done. There are a couple of tests that are done by labs they don't have that option, so patients have to pay our clinic for the test to be done, and then we pay the lab. The lab won't accept payments directly from the patients, but for 99% of the tests that we run, the patients just pay the lab directly. We're not financially involved with the labs. We don't make any money from the labs, patients using the labs or whatnot. So I just always like to make that abundantly clear when I'm talking to my patients about these labs, but I'm just mentioning that in the video as well. So with the cardiometabolic profile done through Doctors Data, so that measures a bunch of different markers, including highly sensitive C-reactive protein, homocysteine, something called the phospholipase A2 score, also known as a plaque score. It measures the oxidized LDL level, measures different types of lipoproteins, so measures markers for insulin resistance, a whole bunch of different things. So that's a blood test. So it's a single tube of blood that's drawn, and that's mailed off to that particular lab. So that's the cardiometabolic profile. Number two is the gastrointestinal profile. So this would be done through a stool test, by and large. So Again, we typically use doctor's data, although other labs are out there that do this type of testing. So it'd be a stool test that would basically look at probiotic levels, look for pathological microbes like bacteria and yeast and things like that, possibly parasites. We can also look at intestinal health markers, doing something called a stool chemistry profile, looking at markers, inflammatory markers like not zonulin, looking at inflammatory markers like lactoferrin, calprotectin, and lysozyme, and also looking at levels of elastase, which is a pancreatic enzyme marker in the gut, looking at secretory IgA. So this can all be done through one stool test, typically done through a comprehensive stool analysis, or CSA as it's called. There's also a subtest there for something called intestinal permeability, which is something done through something called a zonulin test. That's typically actually done through a blood test. So those would be the elements of that gastrointestinal profile. The toxic load profile will be looking at a heavy metal test, which would involve doing a urine test, actually a couple of urine tests, looking for heavy metals like lead and mercury and things like that. The environmental toxin levels will be done through a separate urine test, done through a separate lab called US Biotech, and then measuring something called the glyphosate levels, which would also be done through US Biotech. So there'll be a few different urine tests to get that all done. The detoxification profile, so there's something called a marker of oxidative damage to DNA and RNA, done through something called an 8-OHDG test. So that is done through a urine test. There is a methylation test marker, or a test rather for methylation markers that's done through a blood test, typically done through doctor's data. There's the antioxidant capacity test. So there's a couple of different tests that can look at antioxidant capacity. We actually learn a bit about that through the cardiometabolic profile that I mentioned first, but then we can get additional insight through doing something called an organic acids test, which is a urine test. So we've got a couple of urine tests there, as well as a blood test and the detoxification profile, the nutritional profile, so looking at vitamin levels, mineral levels, and amino acid levels. So this will be done through a combination of blood and urine tests. The mitochondrial health profile, we learned about mitochondrial markers mostly through that organic acid test that I mentioned previously. So that's a urine test. The genomic/DNA profile, learning about genetic susceptibilities, that's done through a saliva test. The hormone profile can be done through a combination of blood tests and urine tests. The thyroid hormone profile will be done through a blood test. Adrenal gland profile typically done through a saliva test or a urine test. And then the last one here is the biological age profile, which is also known as telomere length testing, and that's done through a blood test. There's a couple of other tests that we could add to this list. We haven't updated it in a while, so there's a phospholipid test that we run semi-regularly. That's a blood test. And then there's also something we do at the clinic here called brain mapping, using something called a quantitative EEG or QEEG, and that's doesn't require any samples. It involves putting on a QEEG cap, which is basically looks like a glorified shower cap with all these sensors on it, and we test brain waves using computer software to do that. So those would be a couple of other things to add to the test, everything from head to toe profile. There might be some other tests out there as well, depending on what's going on, like testing for mold toxins, testing for viral levels, and Lyme disease and different things like that. There's other things we might look at with different blood tests, but this is the test everything from head to toe profile. So it's quite a few tests. All of these tests are fairly expensive. Each one of the ones that I mentioned there is going to range anywhere from maybe $100 to maybe $300 on average. So as you might imagine, we don't do the test everything from head to toe profile on very many patients because it's just, quite frankly, exorbitantly expensive. Some patients ask for the option, and we want to give patients if they want that testing, we're happy to do it. But what we typically recommend doing when patients call up and say, we want to test everything from head to toe, it's like, wonderful, we'll test everything from head to toe if you want, but you may want to come in, have a chat with one of our naturopathic doctors here, try to hone in on exactly what's going on with your particular case, and then we can figure out which tests are actually going to be the most useful for you. Because for a lot of patients, while it's always interesting to see these markers, it may not be the most directly clinically relevant. But if patients want to truly test everything from head to toe, it is a gamut of tests, many tubes of blood, other samples, all of that type of thing. So I hope that this information is useful for anyone who is interested in testing everything from head to toe. And if there's any questions at all, feel free to post a comment on this video if you're watching this on the YouTube channel, or feel free to email our front desk at eastcoastnaturopathic@gmail.com.